Welcome to the Water People podcast. This episode is presented by the Pryor Family Foundation in partnership with Greening Australia, who believe that our personal, social, and economic well-being are inextricably linked with our land and sea. Greening Australia works to restore Australian land and waters to produce healthy, productive landscapes where people and nature thrive. Learn more about their work via greeningaustralia.org.au. Our podcast comes to you from the coastal land and waters of both the Bundjalung and Kabi Kabi nations. We'd like to acknowledge these traditional custodians and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We'd also like to extend that respect to all First Nations people this podcast ripples out toward. Today, we're in conversation with surf explorer and author Nik Zanella. In 2019, after decades of research, Nik published Children of the Tide, his first-hand account of unraveling the ancient story of wave riding in dynastic China. I first learned about Nik after seeing Tom Wegener post something on his Instagram about this book called Children of the Tide. And I was like, oh, that looks really interesting, and found out that it is about the ancient surfing culture of China. And that just blew me away. How exciting to get to be witness to surf culture, ancient surf culture, unfolding in a new way. I just found that really provocative, so I grabbed the book straight away.
Yeah, I feel as though Nik's story is kind of the one that I keep going to when I tell people about what we're up to with these conversations, because it's just so fresh and it's so non-surf industry. It's surf culture. It's got nothing to do with our industry. And so it's so exciting to hear his personal adventures with this story and to see the enthusiasm on his face and to hear that really jovial and excited adventure in his voice, that he's following a scent, he's sniffing out a trail of something that was really real for a lot of people at a point in time and has come and gone again from Chinese culture. And it's just exciting. It's like a surfing Indiana Jones or something.
I when I think about his story, I just think about what an unlikely fate. An Italian surfer growing up, occasionally getting good surf in the Mediterranean.
In the Adriatic.
Even less likely to get surf. And falling in love with Chinese language, Chinese culture, eventually migrating to China, spending time there, and then having this beautiful, mind-blowing coalescence of his passions in the highlands of China when he encounters a sculpture of Buddhist monks basically surfing.
And paintings on the walls.
Yeah. And I just thought, wow, what serendipity. Like no one else could have been as uniquely prepared for that discovery as he was.
Yeah, I think he's a natural sleuth. And like our friend over the road, Emiliana Cataldi, who is a good friend of Nik's, they both have had to develop such a nose, an ear, and an eye for subtle details because of growing up in Italy and chasing surf, being absolute surf mad, and needing to be so attentive to get surf there because it's so rare and fleeting that's naturally spilled over into other areas of their life. Like Emmy's just like that too. He's always... everything he seems to do is very attentive as well.
Yeah, they're both deeply curious.
Yeah, and willing to go the extra miles to find certain things they're looking for. And so Nik's approach to surfing in the Adriatic is clear in his approach to Chinese history. And it's just wonderful to also feel that there's these timelines of surfing that are to be uncovered still, and that none of them are more or less exceptional than any of the other timelines. That there is surfing in Peru and on those big reed boards, and that there's surfing in Europe and the UK on belly boards, and there's all these in Africa, of course, there's all these variations of surfing throughout the world wherever there's a breaking wave, and it's just neat that he's uncovered one of this type, which is up these intense riverbore waves, and that it has a whole new story, like, you know, the festivals and all these things, or then the outlawing of it, and it's just fantastic. I really loved the book. I read it really quickly, and it's just a real benefit to our culture to have someone like Nik writing. And
yeah, it's just a reminder to me that surfing belongs to all of us. It belongs to everywhere. The longer I'm surfing and the more I get to observe life in the ocean, the more it seems like surfing is a natural thing to do. You know, the more we get to watch fish cycling through set waves, surfing and surfing and surfing, and birds doing the same and dolphins doing the same. It just seems like this is a natural state of play across time and space.
Yeah, there's waves there, so of course you're going to surf them.
Yeah.
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 One of the really exciting things about Nik's discovery for me was the intertwined Buddhist and surfing stories that seemed so just out of left field, that these, you know, bodhisattvas, these beings were on their way to enlightenment, and so they were just surfing their time away until then, is just so classic and is so beautiful to see, you know, Nik discovering these sort of Buddha attributes to, you know, wave riding culture in that part of the world. And it's just, I know people like Albie Falzon and the other sort of Buddhist surfers we know would be thrilled to hear about this sort of history. Yeah.
So like my revelation moment actually happened in 1981, 82, before the all book started. And I was like 12, 13 years old, and I was spending summers on the beach here on the east coast of Italy. And, you know, as surfers, we rely on northeast swells mainly in summertime. And there was a northeast swell running, and the wind was super strong. The sea during those swells turned dark, like that wine dark, as Homer would say in the Odyssey. And I was walking along the beach. I noticed a group of people like huddling around something, and I walked toward them, and I figured out that they were all looking at a dead dolphin on the beach. It was like a small dolphin, and it had like a gash on the back. It had probably been hit by a boat propeller. And I felt really uncomfortable because all these people were like kind of looking at it and half laughing and touching it with their feet, and I felt like very, very uneasy about that. Luckily enough, like a big squall of rain came down. It started to rain super heavily, and all the tourists dispersed. And I myself, I ran toward the pine wood and hid there because I knew that those rain squalls don't last long. So luckily enough, after maybe 10, 20 minutes, the rain stopped, the wind turned offshore, the sun came out, and the beach was empty. So I just ran back toward the little creature, and I kind of kneeled down and looked at it in the eyes, and I felt like a sort of vibration, like something warm, as if it was, you know, what the Chinese would call qi, like the vital energy of the animal. And I felt it like hitting me through the eyes. And I felt something that I've never felt before. Maybe it was sorrow or pity. I don't know what it was, but sure enough, I grabbed the little dolphin by the tail and I dragged it all the way up the sand dunes, and I gave it a burial. I dug in the sand and I just covered in sand, and then I went back to my house. Back then, I was windsurfing. My father had bought me like an old windsurfer, but there was almost no wind. The wind has switched offshore, so I just grabbed that big board and went through the white water and caught my first wave. You know, like first on my knees and then, clumsily standing up, and I felt that same vibration that I had seen in those eyes. I felt that warm feeling of almost electricity, like coming from my feet all the way up to my head. And I caught a few more waves, but windsurf boards were like really grippy. So like I went back to the beach, my knees were bleeding, my feet were bleeding. But that was my revelation moment. Like I have the clear memory of thinking that was my sense of purpose, that was what I was about, what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And that's what happened. So that was pretty much my first surf standing up and my first revelation moment.
Was there any Chinese influence or anything coming through to you at that point in your life to be able to articulate it as qi? Or how did you interpret it at that point in time? Did you begin a search of explanation for that experience?
I learned the word qi a few years later. I fell in love with Chinese culture quite early as a teenager, and reading the Tao Te Ching, the classic of the way of and virtue, was a big influence. I'm pretty sure I didn't understand anything when I first read it, but I was very fascinated by the idea of Tao and yin and yang. And no, I gave it the word qi. I put the word qi in that feeling only later. Okay, Back then I just felt like this vibration, as if it was the vibration of the living earth, the vibration of the ocean. I didn't call it qi. I didn't have a name for it, and that was maybe the reason why it was so fascinating.
That's so beautiful, and what an incredible experience, sensitive experience to have as a young person. I want to kind of dive into your book a little bit now, because there's just so much fascinating storytelling and such a great adventure that you take us on in Children of the Tide. You dove into translating ancient literature and especially poetry, and it became part of your research. And you went on to reveal that China has probably had a surfing culture for 1,000 years or more. I'd love for you to hike us into that initial temple that you happened upon.
Well, that was another big epiphany in my life. I wanted to start it with the dolphin story because it's what started me into this surfing life that I've led since 40 odd years. But the moment at the temple was something, of course, very peculiar, because I was on a trip. Let's say back in those days, I was flirting with Buddhism a lot. And the scope of that trip was to surf in Hainan a little bit and then to go through temples all the way to Tibet. And we arrived in Kunming, which is in Yunnan province. It's as remote as you can think a place could be from the ocean. It's a lush green forest area, lots of beautiful cultural minorities like the Miao, the Zhuan people, the Naxi. And I decided to go and visit this temple that's called the Bamboo Temple. It's just maybe 10 kilometers north of town. And the temple was fascinating, and I chose it among many in the region because it was on the Silk Road, and it was the first Zen temple that pilgrims would encounter along the Silk Road coming into China from India. The temple had been built around the 12th, 13th century, but it had burned down in the early 1880s. So they had commissioned a reconstruction of the temple. And the reconstruction included this 500 luohan. Luohan is Chinese for arhat, which are enlightened people. That's what the temple is famous for. So I got into the temple and started visiting the courtyard. And once I got into the prayer hall, my jaw dropped. because one wall of maybe 30 of such luohan was depicting a green wave, and many of those Buddhist saints were surfing on top of mythological animals. In particular, I got struck by this one arhat that ended up on the cover of my book, and you can also see it in the first spread. He's standing up on a fish which looks like a carp. I later reconstructed it being a carp. And he's standing on a modern sideways stance, like perfect surf school position, back arm up, looking in front, looking 5 meters in front of the board. And I said, wow, what is that? So back then, that happens late in my surfing life. That was 2006. And back then I had already been working in the surf industry and running a surf magazine. So I had quite a clear idea of what was happening in 1880, both in the surf history and in the history of China. So 1880, surfing still hadn't bridged the gap in between Polynesian culture and white Western culture. So, it was the very early stage of surfing spreading towards the West. Yuka Hanamoku still hadn't been born. That is pretty much the same age when we have those famous Waikiki pictures of a guy holding an alaya in diamond head. Mm. And so I definitively couldn't find any link in between the Polynesian version of the sport and what that guy was doing. So I decided to go and look for the abbot. The abbot is pretty much the manager of the temple. And I found him in his studio, and he was quite surprised that a foreigner, first of all, could speak some Chinese, and went looking for him. So I went straight toward my Chinese wasn't even that good. So I said, hey, Your Majesty, or Your Sanctity, can I ask you a few things? What are those guys doing? Why are they surfing? And he didn't know the Chinese word for surfing, which is chonglan. That means, the modern word for surfing just means wave bath. So, he looked at me quite weirdly, and I said, sorry, I don't really know what activity you're talking about. So after a few more attempts, I managed to take him through the prayer hall and in front of those sculptures. And I pointed at those guys and I said, what are they doing? Are they real people or are they imaginary characters? And he just told me, look, those are arhats. They're people like you and me that attained enlightenment. They're waiting for the next Buddha, the Maitreya, which is like the oncoming Buddha, before they can enter Nirvana. And I said, what are they doing on a board? Why are they surfing? And he said, look, we don't call that surfing. I now understand what you mean. I've seen surfing on TV. We call them Nong Chao Er. And I said, what? And so he scribbled those 3 characters on my moleskin, and he was anxious to go. The guy was busy. There were busloads of tourists coming into the temple, and he had stuff to get ready for. I said, again, where can I find information about that? And he just said, you should go to Hangzhou, and pretty much left. Okay, so all I got left was 3 Chinese characters that I couldn't understand, written on my moleskin in the fastest of cursive styles, and the name of a town that I'd never been to. I knew where Hangzhou was, but I couldn't see any relation in between this town south of Shanghai and wave riding. So that was quite a revelation moment, and that was the beginning of the research. All I had were 3 Chinese characters on a piece of paper and the name of a town. So I had to go back to my university studies and pick up the dictionaries and face the problem of researching 3 words in the vast expanse of Chinese culture. And that's what I try to do.
And it's such a fascinating adventure that you take us on in the book. I love that you started with the dolphin story because I think it illustrates so beautifully the sensitivity that you had even before a surfing life, but also the sensitivity that you grew with your surfing life. And in the book, I love how you describe Adriatic surfers and what a sensual understanding of your world you have to have. You call surf forecasting there as much art as science.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was necessary to understand the world around you because the internet wasn't going to tell you the information. So, make understanding the ocean so easy. Modern internet forecasting really lets us off the hook from the more intimate knowing that, you got to have as an analog surfer in Italy, growing to understand something like the bora. I love how you describe your relationship with the wind and the smell of it. It's just beautiful.
I really appreciate that, Lauren, because those early chapters were about, because the book turned out to be quite lengthy. And I told Sam Bleakley, that has been my editor and my longtime friend, and he helped me throughout this 5-year adventure of writing the book. I told Sam, those chapters are too long. The whole book is coming out over 250 pages. Should we take them off? And he said, forget about that. That's great stuff. And I'm happy he insisted on leaving them there because I'm getting a lot of good feedback about those early chapters, and I really appreciate that you mentioned them.
I love how you have how you write swell and smell with the slash between them at some points in the book as well, because of that relationship, and how when we went through your region long time ago, and my father's side of my family come from the Adriatic. We come from Vis, the island of Vis between Croatia and Italy. So visiting that area and seeing the reality of where you come from and feeling it, and feeling how subtle things are there. It's not like you get this huge swell booming around the corner and it's all very obvious. It's obviously created in you a very sort of investigative approach to things. So do you feel like the way you forecasted your surf life in your early years contributed to how you picked up the scent of this story in China?
Well, being a surfer in Italy before the internet was all about doing your own forecasts and having sensorial stimuli. Looking at the sky. Maybe you don't live right on the coast, but you still have an idea of what is happening along the coast just by looking at the top of the trees or by smelling the air. That made a big difference in my surf culture world. Okay, if you can score waves in the Adriatic, if you can score wave in the Mediterranean, you become pretty much a good forecaster everywhere in the world. Weather pattern here is so compact, so you have same swell patterns as you have in bigger bodies of water, but everything happens in a shorter time. You miss it by a few hours, and you wasted your time and your money, and you get skunked with no waves. So for sure, coming from the outskirt of the surfing world had that advantage, that you learn to enjoy every second of every small swell that happens, and you get in sync with your environment at a level that maybe people grown up in the internet world on a very reliable ocean that gets whatever northwest or the seasonal easy to forecast pattern don't get.
So considering that's where you started from, and then you also were constructing the Surf News magazine in Italy for a long time, and editing and producing that for the surf culture there, did you feel like a sense of belonging to a rich surf culture in Italy? Do you feel like you were leaving that behind a little bit when you were starting to spend so much more time in China and going away from Italy?
I definitively love my roots, And I think I gave justice to that love of the elderly people. I mean, the people that from the previous generation that started surfing, they literally invented surfing in Italy and in the Adriatic just by looking at Big Wednesday and doing their own forecast. But I also was very happy to leave when I left for China over 10 years ago. Surf News had been a great experience, and I think we did it at the top level, working with people like John Callahan, and you guys know Emiliano Cataldi, that's been my friend and brother, and we did some crazy exploration trips together, and we had our article published on the best surf media of the time. And so when I left Italy, it was also because of the economic crisis that struck Europe in 2008. So it was not as good as surf culture and an economic environment as it had been in the early 2000s. So I had sort of lost that sense of belonging. When I left for China, I really felt that I needed to get lost around the planet. And the epiphany moment of running away from Italy came during the first event that was run in Hainan in 2011. And I had been invited as a journalist because I had done quite a few exploration trips around the coast of China in the previous years. As you might already know, like I went surfing with Annie on the back beach on the back of Rio Bay, and I had this epiphany moment where that the northeast monsoons there smelled exactly like the Bora wind we have at home, but everything looked so tropical and lush, and the waves were really good. And I caught a barrel during that session, and then I came back to the lineup. It was only myself and Emmy in the water. My eyes were wide open. I said, Emmy, I want to move here. And surely enough, I find a million excuses, and I linked with local companies, and I started working at several events there. And then as soon as I found a door into that island, I fell in love with it. And I relocated in this small fisherman village on Hainan Island, actually in front of a beautiful right-hander, and got lost. So I have a strong sense of belonging with Italy, with the East Coast, with what we've done for Surf News. But when I left for China, that sense of belonging had given way to a need to run and get lost around the planet. And that's what I did for the past 10 years.
So you talk about the smell and obviously the waves and the feeling there among the ecology. What about the human element? And, you know, obviously for some people listening, they might not know that you are speaking your third language now, English, and obviously Italian and Mandarin is another language of yours. So you were there doing a lot of translation work. Can you dive into a little bit about like the human side? You know, some of the pieces in your book that really struck me were your insights into the different dynasties and Taoism and Buddhism over there. Can you tell us a little bit about what was so attractive for you there in the human culture sense?
For sure. Well, as I told you, my fascination with Chinese culture started quite early by reading Journey to the West, which is a novel from the Ming Dynasty, very funny, about this monkey king that goes to India to retrieve Buddhist sutras. And there's a lot of adventure in that. That was my key into the culture. And I took it in university because I didn't like anything else during the high school year. I was a very poor high school student. My marks never went above like 60%. And my fascination with China led me to take Chinese language and philosophy in university. And so I went through being fascinated by Taoism and then Buddhism, and then graduating on a Ming Dynasty philosopher that It's called Wang Yangming, and he puts Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism together, and he comes out with very interesting, in some ways, surf-related ideas. Like the unity of knowledge and action, and that was what was my other 50% of my cultural life. I was a punk surfer and a skater and a shortboarder, and on the other hand, I was deep into all this Chinese literature and philosophy. The two things joined together when I moved to Hainan. One thing that is very hard for non-Chinese speaking people to understand is that country is country, people is people. I have often been accused of being, pro-China and justifying what's happening, and not talking enough about human rights and all that. I have clear in my mind that government is government, people is people, and speaking Chinese gave me the key into so many personal stories and the lives of people that I get in touch with, and that created a very strong bond in between myself and my friends in China. Where I live on Hainan Island, it's a small fisherman village, and there's about 50 surfers living in the village, and when I'm with them, I don't speak a word of English. I don't speak English nor Italian for weeks on end. And most of my communication in that country happens with the same language of the local people. And that puts me on the same level and makes me understand and share their emotions and their peculiar way of looking at surfing.
What do you mean when you say the peculiar way?
The peculiar way, we need to share in between what was that dynastic wave riding culture that the common surfer don't even know about. Okay, and what is the everyday life of surfers in China right now. Okay, so one of the reasons why I spent the past 5 years writing the book was that I think that my Chinese friends, the surfers that have started surfing only in the past 5 or 6 years mainly, really deserve to have a wider perspective of wave riding culture in their own country, in their own language, in their own environment.
Oh, yeah. How empowering to have that sort of deep historical rooted connection to a culture that the rest of the world, so many of us assumed, is just a new incarnation, in China. But what a source of pride for Chinese surfers to have this revelatory understanding that, maybe their probably not their foremothers, but maybe their forefathers were riding this incredible tidal bore in inland China.
Well, something that I haven't written in the book is that the act of riding the tide, of treading waves, that's talan, that's the word that's used in the poems and chronicles, went on until the late 80s, mid to late 80s. And as you may know, since 2008, there's a competition going on in Hangzhou every year where surfers compete in teams of 2 on jet ski, and we ride the tidal bore for around 1 hour. So every year I have the chance to work at the Silver Dragon Shootout. That's organized by Peter Townend, by the way. And so every year I go there, I try to do some interviews and some field work with local people. And I had the luck of presenting the book and talking about my book to some of the older locals, and I figured out that they were doing it until the 80s. And
You mean the 1980s?
Yeah, the 1980s.
1980s, yeah, that's like 30 years ago.
What were they riding?
They were riding a 3-meter long firwood, F-I-R, firwood boards with no fins, gunny at both ends.
Wow, like a hot curl or something from Hawaii, like maybe that.
Yeah, exactly, like a hot curl, like a hot curl.
Skillful.
That's not easy, yeah.
Skillful wave riders, no doubt. Those are tricky boards to ride.
They were mainly riding prone, but I've been told that the best of them were standing up.
Was it legal then? Were they allowed to do that, or were they slipping through the cracks?
I think it was tolerated. Okay, like look, the fishermen there, they don't get their boats off when the board is on. They just deal with it. Okay, and they're very skilled at that. They're very skillful at dealing with that beast. So it's quite natural that they used it. They used it as a mean of transportation. There's reports of them, of pirates, local pirates, entering villages, like propelled by the tide, and pillaging villages, and then waiting for the water to be running the opposite way, and using the reef just to get out as quick as possible. So they've been dealing and using, and of course also playing with that since possibly a couple of thousand years. So I know for sure that they've been doing it until 85, 89, 88. And so my next step would actually be to reconstruct this recent past. Mm-hmm. Collecting information in China is not easy. One of the barriers is, of course, the language itself. And so I was lucky enough to meet the university teachers and people that led me through this research for my book. But this on-field research would be something totally new, and I can't wait to go back to Hangzhou to go on and investigate that. I was talking about this with Tom Wagner in the past month, and he's been doing similar work with Japan lately, and he was fascinated by my book and my research. So how good would it be to go back there, catch up with the last children of the tide, have a board shaped, and surf it with them? That would be surf archaeology at its best.
Absolutely. Have you encountered any indication that women might have also been playing with the tide? And I love that that's how it's phrased, as in playing. And that's one of the great messages of your book for me, is that surfing, despite our cultural understandings, doesn't belong to any one culture. It has appeared spontaneously like fire in every culture where there was a rideable wave, probably.
Exactly.
Is there any indication that women might have been part of that ancient tidal board riding action?
Lorraine, Chinese language doesn't have masculine or feminine cases. So I cannot infer from the poems and from the dynastic chronicles if it was boys or girls, men or women. That's actually like a really good question. Like Nong Chao the last character means children, but it can be daughter or son. So at this stage, I haven't found any evidence of them being either men or women.
Were there monks who were on the path to enlightenment who were women? Is there indication that women
were... the Harhats?
Yeah.
No, all the Harhats in the bamboo temple in Kunming are masculine, male.
I'd love to know more about the subtle shades of the meaning of Nong Chao.
Well, that was where the all research started. So Nong means to do, to manage, to handle. It depicts a bowl made of jade and two hands handling it. Well, before I go on with this, I need to tell you a little bit about how Chinese characters work and how my research went on with that. All Chinese characters can be traced back to a very ancient form that comes from the oracle bone of the Shang dynasty, like 1,500 years before Christ. And Chinese characters pretty much depict something without inferring the sound. So my first approach to the three characters that the monk gave me was to go on a dictionary of Chinese etymology and research what the three characters meant in their shamanic meaning, in their Neolithic meaning dating to the Shang dynasty 1,500 years before Christ. So Nong is two hands handling a precious cup. In time, it came to mean to play with, to fool with, to mess around with, to activate. The big character, the main focus of my whole book is the character Chao, that means tide. Tide in the Western culture is strictly related to the sea. It's the word tide shares the same etymology as time, in that it is the periodic raising and falling of the water level. The Chinese had tide charts a couple of hundred years before we had. And that was because the tide was very, very strictly related to rivers. The tide range is massive in the East China Sea. Up in Hangzhou, where the non-shower were active, it can go like from 4 to 9 meters. So when the tide is up, its influence goes inland for hundreds of kilometers. So the word tide in Chinese is more strictly related to river than it is to the ocean. Okay, so the word tide means tide, wave, tidal bore. It also means like current or flow, but it also means period of time. And if you take away that part of the character that's related to the water, it also means dynasty. This, if we go deeper into each component of the word tide, we have grass, river, sun. That's the stories that links that character is the sun rises on the meadows aside of the river. The water goes up and down. And there's another meaning of Chao that's immediately understandable to all Chinese people, and that means orgasm. And so when a Chinese person sees that character Chao has all of these different nuances, it means tide, it means period of time, it means dynasty, because only the emperor could have full control of the water levels in the canals and rivers. And it also has this back taste of orgasm. Okay? So let me go to the last character and then I patch all this together. The last character is in Nongchao means children. As I told you, Lauren, it's not boy nor girl. It doesn't tell us if there was male or female. It means child, youngster, and the depiction of the character shows boy with a big head split open. It's not that it's being hit by something, it's just that the bones haven't fully formed yet. So it's like a young person. If we patch together these three characters, the first meaning would be children playing with the tide, or children fooling with the tide. But that first character, known, also means to activate. So it infers that those guys were actually had some sort of control over this tidal wave. And on the other hand, there's also like a revolutionary meaning to that. Nowadays, the word non-Chawer in China can mean someone being anti-establishment, revolutionary, someone who dares to do something remarkable and dangerous. So it also means those that are able to overturn a dynasty and induce an orgasm.
Wow.
It's very in parallel to Western shades of understanding and countercultural surfing meanings.
That must have suited your Italian surf punk personality traits just perfectly when you interpreted that.
Yeah. Well, I tattooed that calligraphy of Children of the Tide on my side when I turned 50 last year, okay? That's how much I like that idea.
Sorry to interrupt the conversation, but we wanted to take a moment to recognize the generous folks who have supported the Water People podcast this season. The Water People podcast is brought to you by the fine folks at Sanuk. In 1997, founder Jeff Kelly started out with one simple goal: to make people smile and to encourage them to pass it on. Sanuk has been advocating for a more playful and inclusive surfing culture for more than 2 decades, while crafting some of the comfiest footwear around. Thanks, Sanuk, for your support and for encouraging water people around the globe to protect their happy places. Learn more about Sanuk's partnership with the Surfrider Foundation at sanuk.com. Thanks also to Gary McNeil Concepts Americas, who build cosmic surfboards for cosmic people. We love Gary McNeil's enthusiasm for building boards, and especially his passion for combining recycled and plant-based materials to craft boards that prioritize durability, sustainability, and high performance. For custom orders and to check out the gallery of boards currently available in the Americas, head to GaryMcNeilConcepts.com. I think one of the beautiful things about your work, especially bridging the gap between the ancient traditions of Chinese surfing and then working with, raising modern Chinese surfers, is that you have this understanding of the way that surfing was ritualized in the ancient Chinese surfing culture, and surfers often performed for the emperors and to appease the god of the tide. But can you talk about the spiritual or religious elements of early Chinese surfing?
There definitely was a direct relation in between those tide players and Buddhist religion. All along the Hangzhou Delta and all along the coastline, they venerate the god of tide that regulates, of course, the tide, and they personify it with a dragon. Okay, that deity needed to be controlled, and again, we have the yin and yang of Chinese culture. How do you control it? From a physical point of view, you build dams, you put concrete, and so the Chantanjian, the river where they used to play, was fortified starting from the 6th or 7th century. And concrete is still being laid as we speak. So that was the young, let's say, technological way of controlling it. On the other hand, there was a ritual that I would say yin way of controlling it, and it would be sacrificing themselves, almost like a self-sacrifice to the god of the tide. So in the poems and chronicles, we often find this link, this description of the children of the tide as being almost very similar to Buddhist monks. In reality, those guys were fishermen, barge pilots, living along the shore and being experts in dealing with that beast. So that ritual that they used to do at every mid-autumn festival when the tide is at its biggest was a way to show the people. There were like hundreds of thousands of people coming down to on the banks to witness that rite, to control it. So they would, before the tide was coming, they would paddle out straight towards it, then turn around, stand up, and the chronicles say perform 100 maneuvers in front. I'm still dreaming about what those maneuvers could be. In front of the people, of the inhabitants of Hangzhou, and in front of the emperor himself, just to show that wave could be controlled and that they were controlling it. So that was like the ritual side of it. Like about maneuvers, what were they doing on that wave? I went on in my book to analyze a few characters that are used. One character that they commonly used to describe what they were doing is a character Wu, W-U, that means dancing. So the character itself represents a shaman. You know what I mean, right? Like a shaman, and who is dancing, walking up and down, holding ox tails in his hands. So that character of dance include, like, sort of implies walking up and down the board. So maybe they were cross-stepping, we don't know.
I wanted to dive into the beast that you keep referring to. I like that you use that word. And the feeling of riding a river wave like that. I've had the opportunity to ride a couple in my time, and I think the one that was the most fun for me was in Bordeaux in France.
Oh yeah, the masquerade.
And it was fun. It was probably more fun because we'd just been drinking lots of wine on the banks of the river, on the grass, in the sun, like you talk of in China, and we almost missed the wave because we were having such a good time eating good food and drinking wine. But the whole experience was just so bizarre, and again, I love that you talk about paradoxes so much. And I just remember sitting in the river in this, brown water, and just listening to birds, and there being no sort of white noise of rumbling surf or anything like that. And we're just sitting there in this very strange place on surfboards. And then all of a sudden we could hear the rumble, and birds were scattering up ahead. And then around the corner of the river came that line of white water that was disappearing and reappearing in new places. And then everyone frantically scrambled. Like, I was with Oki and I think Taj Burrow and all these other, really impressive surfers. And we were just scrambling, trying to figure out how to read this wave that was coming towards us so that we could catch it together and ride it. And it was just amazing. It was such a great experience. We did it for 2 days in a row on the tide change. And so given that this beast in China is so much stronger, longer, and taller than that one in France, I wanted to just hear from you some of the insights into trying to ride that thing, man. Like, have you been dragged by that along the edges of the river, or have been completely overwhelmed by that thing at all?
Well, the first contradiction of all of this story is that I've been on the river possibly more than anyone else on the planet, as I've been working as a judge in like almost all of the competitions, but I've never been allowed to surf it myself.
Wow.
Okay? And so I really hope the guys at the PT and all of them just, listen to my plea, like, please let me have one go. Okay? But I've seen that animal do things that I've never seen any ocean wave doing. It is, the Chantanjian is considered the Mount Everest of tidal bores. It's possibly 4 or 5 times bigger than the Masquerade in France. And as the dynastic chronicles say, and you've confirmed it to me, when it comes, it's just like a silver line.
Yeah.
But the noise is impressive. You can hear it almost before you see it. Okay, and then we wait for it. When we have the competition, we are sitting on jet skis, and I'm on the judging boat under this river, under this bridge called Bridge Number 9. That's where the good section starts. And it arrives, and the white water on the biggest day is maybe 3-4 meters tall.
Wow.
Just a wall of 4-meter white water goes out 2 kilometers in length, like community. And then it hits the bridge and it creates like this A-frame peak that then morphs into a left-hander that lasts maybe for 2 kilometers, and it's like double overhead. And then it fizzles out, and then it forms again into this like gaping right-hander. Then it fizzles out again. The river starts to bend, and at each bend, the wave gets a different angle, and it refracts on sandbanks. It refracts on the concrete walls on the side, like doing a million different things. Like, for example, like sometimes it just stops, like almost still. It slows down to the point of almost not being moving, and it's like this stationary wave, just like machine going. Okay, and then it can fizzle out and speed up again, because as it's not breaking, it's in deep water and it goes super fast. So we got caught off guard quite a few times in big section, and we figured out that we were behind. Okay, we were behind the wave, and so we just sped up and went back in front of it as Jamie O'Brien was like throwing massive spray in our boat as we dropped into Jamie O'Brien, and just try to make our way in front of it. And then at times it's not only one wave, it does something that's called whelping, where that wave front splits into 3 or 4 perfect waves. You see, like the first one might not even be the best one. It's like 3-4 right-handers going on like for 3 minutes, and then fizzling out again, and then it's nothing, and then it reforms somewhere. So I've seen that animal doing things that I'm surprised at every time. Like it's just wow. I thought I had seen all sort of wave variables, by traveling to all these different locations, but that wave is different. That wave is totally different.
And I love that you have the sensitivity to write about all of that in the book, where I just feel like it all comes back to your early days in Italy on the northeast coast there, and having to develop a very keen sensitivity to subtle factors in the world around you. And I just love that, man, because I can really relate to that. I love, for us, like right now we're in autumn. We're in that time of year where you wake up in the morning and there's a coolness in the air. There's dew on the grass. There's clear skies, and there's just an infinite amount of subtle cues about what the day ahead is going to bring, and how enriching that is. And that's such a beautiful part of surfing, that can deliver that kind of sensitivity for us.
Totally. It's about being in the moment.
Yeah, and that's it. And picking up all of those cues of the moment, all of those languages that are speaking to us. And I just wonder, like, where are you going to go to from here? You speak all of these languages. You've dived into this ancient story with all of these modern expressions. Where are you going next? Where are you taking this adventure? Because I want another book to come out of you, because I love that book, man. I want to read whatever you're going to write about this.
Thank you, David. I'm really happy to hear you saying that. I don't know where I'm taking it. I'm actually taking it in 2 different directions. One direction would be to track those lost children of the tide, and to wherever it takes me to. So my plan was to go to Hangzhou, and I'm already in touch with. I have like a WeChat contact of one of the children of the tide. It's like having like a WhatsApp contact of one of those guys, and I want to get, which is quite like fascinating. So I want to catch up with them, and I know where they are, and I know what they're up to. They work at the event, some of them. So one direction for me would be to dig deeper into the modern aspect of that practice. Okay. Another direction where my writing is taking me, and you're telling me that you really enjoyed the Adriatic, like the different beginnings side of my story, and that would be another direction where I could take my writing to, like talking about different beginnings, and how surfing started in different environments, in different ways that are not necessarily related to the Polynesian version of the sport. So, like I just discovered, for example, that Italy had a belly boarding wave riding culture that goes back to at least to the late the 19th century. It's something about maybe 1850, 1880, and some of that tradition has been passed from grandpa to father to son, all the way to nowadays. So I find evidences of pre-contact wave riding in Europe. Also, for example, through Peter Troy, he mentions that Italian and Brazilian body surfers were some of the best. And he came in 61, and I found like videos in old archives of them still doing that in the 50s and way earlier, because like Europe started having a beach culture starting from the 1850s. So a different beginning would be one direction, with Italy being part of that narration, and my other direction would be to dig deeper into the modern non-chow era and see what the guys were doing until recent times.
Fantastic. I think both of those sound to me really entertaining reads and really insightful, but also actually really needed. Like, it feels to me what is needed in the world right now is a deepening of our connection to ecology, like a deepening of our relationships to the places that we belong to. And if it's in pursuit of waves, that's fine, but one of the fruits of deepening our relationship to our ecology, to me, is understanding it better, understanding what is being brought on the wind or the tide or the river flow, how healthy or unhealthy these places are, how healthy or unhealthy we are because of that. And so that's another thing that I love, and I feel that you have a real gift to offer to our surfing organism, no matter where it is on the planet, is the value of our deep understanding of ecology. So please do it, man. Just please keep writing and keep sharing that, because I feel like it is, like I said, it's really entertaining, it's really insightful, but I also feel it's really important right now, for sure.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate you understanding that. Like speaking about the environment, I can really see the difference in between surfers and non-surfers and like city dwellers in China, in the sense that if you live on the beach, if the beach is your office, the place where you fall in love, your playground, like you immediately want it to be clean and start to ask yourself questions.
Thanks to Nik for opening our eyes to new ancient histories of surf culture. You can learn more about Nik on Instagram at Nik Zanella. Sound engineering and music for this episode by Shannon Soul Carroll. On behalf of myself, Lauren Hill, and my partner in rhyme, Dave Rastovich, thanks for listening with us. We'll be continuing the conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcast. You can find every episode and some extras on our website, waterpeoplepodcast.com.